Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Forward BDS. That's the topic for tonight. And with us, we have Professor Cindy Franklin from English Department at UH Mānoa to discuss all what that means and matters regarding boycott, divestment, and sanctions, that BDS, was a call from Palestinian civil society to counter the activities, illegal activities of the State of Israel and Palestine, and to call for the international community to condemn and boycott the State of Israel because of its illegal and inhumane activities against the Palestinians. All right, thank you, Cindy, for coming over. And so we will discuss matters like even local matters regarding boycott, divestment, and sanctions in the context of what's happening in terms of U.S. economic and cultural boycott of the State of Israel, and I would say in Palestine. And also in the context of the BDS movement, because U.S. ACB is part of the BDS, but is focused on the academic part of all of that. So how would you introduce that, BDS and US ACB for our viewers? And we have talked about those matters before, but by way of reminding and restating before we go into the real meat of the matter.
Well, as you mentioned, there was a call put out in 2005 or 4 by Palestinian civil society, I think 170 different organizations and groups, calling for a boycott of Israel and boycott, divestment, and sanctions until 3 demands were met. So there are 3 main planks to BDS and to the U.S. academic and cultural boycott of Israel, which works with the national BNC, or Boycott National Committee, and PACB, the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. So those 3 planks are firstly to take down the wall and get out of the occupied territories. Another is to create conditions of equality inside of Israel, to get rid of the laws that make what is Israel essentially an apartheid state. And the third is to observe the UN guaranteed right of return to Palestinians. And I think that one thing that accounts for the growing popularity of BDS is these are all tenets that in some ways are just very liberal. They are asking that Israel comply with international law, nothing more. And so these are just demands that are very much within the purview of international law and human rights discourses.
It is amazing that, like the State of Israel and Palestine violates international law, international humanitarian law. It's like collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. The Nazis did collective punishments and so forth. And yet, the U.S. that says like it's for freedom, democracy, and liberty and all of that is not only silent, but defends the State of Israel and Palestine in United Nations Security Council, does all kinds of vetoes for anything that like really touches tangentially the state of Israel and all these violations in Palestine. So this is kind of like really an awakening thing for a lot of people who might think that the U.S. is for humanitarian law, international law, and all of that. Why is it silent on, the State of Israel and Palestine doing those violations? But, that's a rhetorical question.
But it's an
but, you might want to comment on that.
I mean, it's an interesting question because it's not only silent, but it is actually, we are Israel's main supporter, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that what's happening in the U.S. in terms of creeping fascism is first encountered in relationship to the kinds of censorship and criminalization that we see happening to people that support the boycott movement in particular, because we have 26 laws on the books that that make it a criminal act to support BDS. We have the first thing that happened after the shutdown is to defend, attempts to defend Israel and to criminalize BDS. The U.S. Senate just overwhelmingly passed legislation on Monday, the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act, or Senate Bill 1, advanced by 74 to 19, I think. And that is a package that guarantees $38 billion in funding over a 10-year period. That was started under Obama. It puts that firmly into place, and it also includes an Israel anti-boycott act that can criminalize businesses or individuals that support BDS with prison time and millions of dollars in fines. And then it also has a kind of combating BDS act that, again, is a curtailment of civil liberties. We have groups such as J Street, which is a pretty kind of middle-of-the-road Zionist organization, saying these are bad.
Even
this
the
is bad
Zionists are
legislation
disagreeing with each other,
because it's such a clear violation of free speech. Boycott is, of course, protected as an act of free speech. And yet you get these congressional figures saying, well, boycott's an act, it's not a speech. And I'm just like, can you do like 5 minutes of research to realize that free speech covers acts and that boycott is specifically a protected act of free speech. So we have this kind of criminalization happening, and we have this massive financial support for Israel happening, but we're also at an interesting moment where we are seeing an increasing mainstreaming of BDS. For the first time, we have 2 congressional members who have come out clearly in support of BDS, and Rashida Tlaib and
Ilhan Omar,
and that's unprecedented.
Right. And Ilhan Omar was re-elected, right? And Rashida Tlaib was new to Congress.
Tlaib put a post-it with Palestine on the map in her congressional office, and has spoken quite forthrightly about why she defends BDS in relation to these human rights violations that you have been talking about. So we are seeing a kind of interesting moment, and I think it's significant that none of the Democratic hopefuls for 2020 came out in support of this.
Absolutely, they wouldn't.
Otherwise, attempt to criminalize, because I think it's becoming an increasingly important and unpopular issue. I think Israel is becoming increasingly important and increasingly unpopular among Democratic voters.
Yeah, just to interject something, like most of those people who say, like, for instance, boycott is not free speech because it's an act, they defend the question of like donation for elections, by people. And if they say, oh, you should limit it to a certain amount, they say, oh, you are limiting free speech. These are the same guys.
Corporations can have free speech.
And corporations becomes an individual and all of that, and they have free speech.
It's just people that support Palestine.
So there you go, how like they play around on words and people's emotions and understandings, so to pass that which they want to support. So I'm looking at the U.S. Campaign for Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel website, US ACBIS. And it's interesting, there's a number of activities, academic boycott campaigns, academic associations endorsing boycott and resolutions, who might they be? Boycott, Study Abroad in Israel, and a lot of others. But if you want to like pick up on one of those and say something, which one would you pick?
Well, right now I think I would pick the one on study abroad,
Yeah.
just because that is U.S. I'm on the organizing collective for
Yeah.
the U.S. for U.S. ACB.
Mhm.
That is our most recent campaign, and it's one we've long been wanting to launch.
Mhm.
But it's and the reason I think that it is an especially difficult campaign, but an important one, is that it doesn't just focus on the occupied territories. It's saying the problem is inside of Israel itself.
Yeah, the occupied territories is like this, the West Bank. I mean,
And Gaza,
and Gaza, and so far as Palestine is concerned, right?
Whereas study abroad is calling attention to the fact that Israeli universities, first of all, actively support the occupation.
The occupation. Yeah.
They support it militarily. They support it in terms of Hospra paying students to support PR campaigns. They're on seized land oftentimes, and so I think that there's that, but there's also the fact that they are on their face discriminatory insofar as U.S. students cannot attend those study abroad programs if they are Palestinian Americans or if they are Muslims. They also might not be able to get into Israel in the first place. And so those are programs that are discriminatory. And so I think this campaign is an important one in calling attention to that. And this is something that students are starting to lead movements towards at different universities to boycott study abroad programs. And so I think that's an interesting campaign. It's also one that has been in the news with the actions of John Cheney Leopold and Lucy, blanking out on her last name,
me too.
but a graduate student at the University of Michigan. Both of them had declined to write letters of recommendation for students who wanted to attend Israeli universities, and they did it on a principled opposition to BDS, or I'm sorry, principled opposition in support of BDS. And Cheney Leopold received a number of punishments for taking that position. And the graduate student did not receive the same kind of punishments, perhaps because there was such a fierce outcry in response to John Cheney Leopold having been
But here I want to
punished.
interject something like, if a student asks you to write a letter of recommendation, you're not obligated to write a letter of recommendation, are you?
You are not required to write it's actually University of Michigan. I think I might have said I don't know if I got that right the first time or not. But anyway, it's University of Michigan. No, I mean, writing a letter of recommendation is not a requirement of your job. I think certainly it's not a good teaching practice to uniformly refuse to write letters of recommendation for students. I think that's something I would strongly say is you are not fulfilling your responsibilities in an overall sense, but it's a case-by-case decision. And it's one that it's not within it's not a violation of one's job.
Yeah, we're often inundated by writing a lot of letters of recommendations. I remember once 9 letters in one semester, for instance. Which is fine. But there's something against your principles, etc. And since it's not an obligatory thing, then why would you be penalized? I mean, that tells you what? What does that tell you?
And I mean, I think that it tells you again this kind of singling out. Lucy Peterson, now her name is Lucy Peterson, made a statement about her decision, and she's a Jewish woman, and said that she, really in good conscience could not support a student undertaking study at an Israeli institution given the kinds of human rights violations that are happening
Yeah.
there. And I think that she was probably set up in that, somebody
Yeah.
somebody
They do
turned that
by the
letter
way.
over.
Those Zionists, they do
And
that.
so, but it's been an interesting kind of case, both in terms of the defense that has been mounted for the two of them, as well as the kinds of backlash and threats that they have received for their actions.
Well, that's democracy in action. This is, rather interesting, like, in terms of what we're saying, forward BDS. If BDS, and part of it is the academic boycott, were not working, why would everybody go berserk about it, So actually it's working in terms of BDS, including the academic boycott, because of all these violations of international law, international humanitarian law, and just basic decency, So that's why you have like this kind of counterattack on BDS, so much so that Congress, U.S. Congress, violating the First Amendment, on the Constitution, violating that, but kind of compelled, perhaps for whatever reason, to support something that's against the First Amendment just to please the state of Israel and Palestine and its violations of international humanitarian law and international law beyond that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, I think when these acts are collective, they're all the more powerful. You can punish individual faculty members who take stands, but Pitzer College faculty as a whole decided that they would vote to suspend their study abroad program. I think those kinds of collective actions are very inspiring, both because they show a kind of sea change, and also because it is harder to penalize an entire faculty than it is to pick one or two students.
Or an academic association.
Or associations.
You have experience in that, and there have been a number of academic associations who voted for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of the state of Israel and Palestine. Do you want to say a quick thing about it because of your involvement nationally in the matter?
So I've been part of a number of campaigns in that regard. One was the American Studies Association campaign, and we voted in 2013.
Yeah,
or
probably.
14.
Yeah, I forget, but
I'm getting bad with my dates here. I think it was 2013 or 14 to endorse the academic boycott, and that was a campaign that had a many years lead up to it, and we've had tremendous backlash from that in the form of these kinds of legislations that we're seeing, but also the American Studies Association has been sued by Ken Marcus's organization, and also by some individual faculty members who are mostly retired at the University of Pennsylvania. That lawsuit is ongoing. I don't think it's going to get anywhere, but it was a kind of punishment for that act. And there's also been, at the same time, and a kind of that showed a kind of sea change. It made the front page of the New York Times. We had Netanyahu going on, saying BDS is the most serious threat to Israel, and so the ASA passing that passing that resolution was tremendously important. NISA, the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association, passed an academic boycott resolution. The Association for Asian American Studies has, the Critical Ethnic Studies has, African Lit Association has. There's a number of additional associations as well. And
there is debate in other ones like
the Modern Language Association, which is a very large academic association, did not pass a boycott resolution, and in fact, the same year that it was up for vote, passed one that actually said that the MLA shall not engage in boycott of Israel. It was unprecedented resolution to forbid something that we were not doing. And that was spearheaded by Carrie Nelson and some other members of the MLA who have made it a pretty full-time job to campaign against BDS.
BDS and
And
US
they were directly working with people in Israel to defeat that that resolution. They did it through a lot of, I think, highly unethical. They engaged in, I think, a lot of highly unethical behaviors, including getting hold of the entire mailing list in a way that is prohibited, and kind of making use of MLA type of logo and such, so it looked like the MLA was
very dishonest,
contacting its
very
membership.
dishonest,
They were pretty nefarious means of campaigning that in which they engaged. But the main thing that happened in the MLA is that you need a 10% threshold to pass things, and it's such a large body, and mostly people don't pay any attention to elections, and so when things don't pass, it's not that surprising. But and then the association, the anthropology, American Anthropology Association, came very close to passing a boycott resolution and mounted a tremendously important campaign. And I would say, you know, as someone who participated in the MLA campaign and knows people who participated in the AAS campaign, that you cannot measure those just by whether the resolutions pass, but by the kinds of education that happens in that process. And one of the things that I'm really proud of that we did with the MLA one is we produced an evidence document that is 40 pages or more long that documents the ways in which Israeli universities are supporting the occupation. And I feel like we you know we have this document that I think is tremendously useful and did some educating that I hope, you know, that's the whole point, or that's one of the main points of this anyway, is to educate.
Yeah, and there are universities also on West Bank stolen land, you know, after the 1967 occupation by the State of Israel and Palestine. And they are on, you know, stolen land. And they are fighting against Palestinian indigenous population. Yeah, so I mean, this is like hugely illegal and takes you back to the 17th and 18th centuries, which is amazing that the U.S., well, in a way, if you buy the like freedom, liberty, democracy story, or narration, so to speak, then it would be amazing that the U.S. is really supporting that kind of stuff. But, you know, other things I'm looking at here, academic defense, resist racist repression, defend solidarity with the Palestinian people, national defense campaign. And then there are academic defense campaigns as well. So these are some of the things that U.S. ACBI is involved in. But just to say, it's not only in the United States. It's all over in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and other places around the world. You know, this is a thing. But going back to the American Anthropological Association, for instance, or MLA, what you said is not only like that it did not pass, but the amount of education, right? But also the significant number of people on those associations who support, you know, U.S. ACBI, etc. So, and the struggle continues in MLA and American Anthropological Associations and others, but also other faculty, retired or still on the job, so to speak, have come up, you know, in support of U.S. ACBI, for instance, or BDS for that matter. For instance, Angela Davis, for instance. Could you say something about recent, well, I mean, people know about her history, struggle and all of that, but her support of the Palestinian cause might not be well known to a lot of people, so we can go from there if you like.
Angela Davis has been a longtime staunch supporter of Palestinians, and ever since the start of the BDS movement has been a supporter of BDS. Her support has been unwavering and longstanding. And so that, you know, the kind of revoking of the award that she was to receive by the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and that which was actually they gave it to her, they took it away. There was a lot of backlash. They re-offered it.
Yeah. Did she accept it?
You know, did she?
I don't know. I mean, you know, it's a good thing.
The re-offering just happened,
yeah.
and there
Yeah.
was an alternate event,
Yeah.
and I don't know what has happened.
I wouldn't accept it, but anyway.
If she has re-accepted it,
Yeah.
but she, you know, it certainly backlashed to revoke that award. And first, when the award was initially revoked, they didn't say why the award was revoked.
Yeah.
And, you know, Angela Davis has taken a number of controversial positions in all kinds of ways. So I thought, well, you know, I don't know for sure that this is going to be about Israel, but it was quickly revealed that it was, in fact, pressure from Zionist
organizations in the United
that
States,
led to the revoking of that award. And she made an incredibly beautiful statement of support for Palestine after that award was revoked. But she has, you know, she's long been associated with solidarity for Palestine. There's a Black for Palestine video that was released in 2014, and she's one of the, you know, kind of iconic figures that is featured in that video. And so she's just been completely unwavering. And in fact, a local story I can share about Angela Davis is when she was here as the Inouye chair. I was hosting 2 students who were part of the Birzeit Right to Education campaign. They send students on a national tour, and the students go and they share their stories.
University in the West Bank.
In the occupied West Bank.
Occupied West Bank.
And so these students, Mai Hassan and Noor Douglas came, and their visit coincided with Angela Davis's time here. And Angela Davis is a much sought after speaker and can, you know, charge whatever she wants. And I don't know what her usual fees are, but when she was told these students were coming and asked if she would participate in conversation with them, she immediately agreed to do this. And I was so impressed by what she did because people thronged to that event. And I know it was because she has a big name. People were lined up outside. It was a completely full event. I believe you were there. And as you'll remember, she just gave the floor to those students. She did not think this is my time to talk or anything like that. I just felt like she just really generously gave these 2 brilliant students the floor. They're brilliant students. And that's the kind of generosity and ethos, I think, that governs her solidarity for Palestine. But there have also been, you know, I think Michelle Alexander is another academic who's recently made a statement in favor of not BDS explicitly, but Palestine, and said that, spoke to the kind of hostile environment that makes it difficult to speak out in support of Palestinian human rights, but she said it was time for her to do that. And she did that in the New York Times in an op-ed, and I think that has been tremendously important in changing the climate around what it's possible to say.
Even in the New York Times.
In the New York Times. And Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times followed up by saying, yes, this is a big taboo. People feel like they're going to suffer if they speak out in support of what people are experiencing in Palestine. But she said that, you know, change is coming. And so I think that Michelle Alexander's op-ed was of tremendous importance.
It should be led by Americans. Actually, it's wonderful.
And, you know, so too Mark Lamont Hill's recent firing from CNN because during a UN testimony, he said Palestine will be free from the river to the sea that was perceived to be an anti-Semitic statement. And
a call for independence.
It's a kind of zero-sum game. If you support Palestine, you're automatically
so it tells you where
anti-Semitic.
CNN is actually really in the last instance.
But and again, I think his firing created a kind of backlash that I hope in the end does more to advance a climate in which one can say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free than otherwise. But there have been a lot of different kinds of events that one can mark as really sea changes of sorts. And another in this regard would be the Jewish Voice for Peace.
Before that, just to say, like river to the sea, we're talking about the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. That's geographic Palestine. And the call is for having like one state for Jews, Christians, Muslims, you know, to live in terms of democratic institutions and so on, and no discrimination as happened in apartheid South Africa, etc., which actually the Israeli state can give like lessons to apartheid South Africa, which they were in support of, by the way.
I mean, I'm glad that you clarified that slogan because it's often seized as evidence that Palestinians want to push Jews into the sea and wipe them off the face.
Well, the sea is there, you know, so no, I mean, that's not what is said.
No, and I think you're rightly saying what it actually calls for is just for Palestinians to live freely. And the assumption that for Palestinians to live freely means for Jews to either disappear or, you know, be, you know, killed or driven away is that's a Zionist myth that directly counters this kind of call that Mark Lamont Hill was making, which was, as you said, for democracy, and it should not be a zero-sum game. Palestinian Jewish freedom should, Jewish Israeli freedom should not be dependent on subjugation of Palestinians. You know,
go ahead.
There should just be freedom for everyone in that region, also including, as you said, Christians. Not all
because I am
Palestinian.
You know, I am Palestinian. I'm not Muslim. My family is Christian. You know, so I mean, there you go. And there's like about 15% of Palestinians are Christian. Be that as it may, but I wanted to say something about Benjamin Netanyahu, who is now the Prime Minister in the State of Israel. And if you talk about a nefarious guy or a guy with nefarious activities, that's the guy. I mean, and the proof of that is that he's being accused of all kinds of illegal activities as the Prime Minister in the State of Israel and Palestine. But what I wanted to say about what he usually say, and he's like a master of propaganda, which is called hasbara in Hebrew. He would, like when Israelis go into the West Bank and kick out Palestinians, and then the Palestinians protest that, you know, you took my land, etc. He says, you see, the Arabs don't want the Jews to live with them. You see what I'm saying? Well, but now when it goes like Palestine shall be free from the river to the sea, he doesn't want any Arabs there. He wants to kick even the Palestinians who have even Israeli citizenship in the State of Israel in occupied Palestine 1948, right? So like now the shoe is on the other foot. They don't want that. So that's the propaganda. But nobody is stealing land if you want to go and be free from the river to the sea, right? You know, nobody is like stealing land from anyone else. They don't want Palestinians to be living in the State of Israel proper before the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But yet, if the Palestinians resist the stealing of their lands or the robbery of their lands, then it means that the Palestinians don't want Jews to come in and live with them, which is completely false, you know. But with people not knowing what's going on, they say, oh, okay, you see, they don't want.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we have a move rightward in so many different parts of the world right now, and certainly Israel is one of them. And in some ways, it just makes clearer what a lot of liberal, guises had made harder to see, which is that you cannot have a Jewish state and a democracy. And one of the things that Netanyahu and his government have made clear is they have no interest in democracy. They're quite frank about the fact that they want a Jewish state, that they do not want Palestinians to have equal rights, even though Palestinians make up 20% of the people inside the borders of Israel.
Inside the borders of the state.
And so I think that the kinds of baldness of the statements, I'm trying to remember the name of the Israeli official who said, I don't think fascism is a bad word.
Well, I don't know actually, because all of them have said similar stuff,
This was a recent statement saying, I don't have a problem with fascism.
Well, Hitler was a fascist as well. Nazism is fascism, right? Mussolini was a fascist. But it's interesting because Zionists, during Mussolini's time in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, were collaborating with the fascists. Jabotinsky, who was a Zionist leader, he even trained troops, Israelis in fascist Italy. You see what I'm saying? And they had a relationship with them. And Jabotinsky was the one who first mentioned the notion of the iron wall. You know what I'm saying? So, this is interesting to see the relationship between that. On that, there is a number of authors who have, Lenny Brenner was one of them, who's Jewish, and he wrote a book about World War II and before World War II, Zionism in the Age of the Dictators, and showed how the Zionists were collaborating with fascists in Poland and other countries, in Italy and Germany and so forth, to make sure they would get trained militarily, like as Jabotinsky did in Italy, but also to have certain kinds of relationship so that Hitler's Germany would transfer Jews to Palestine. You see what I'm saying? So they will collaborate with the devil just to create their, to effect their own goals, etc. No kind of compunctions about, well, this is Nazi Germany. Why are you in support of it? Why are you collaborating with it, etc. This is history. People can go and read those books that are very well documented and so forth. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that your comments are making me think about, and I'm someone who is always very careful to not combine, say the Israeli Jews are like the Nazis, just because I think that those kind of things.
I'm not saying Israeli Jews. I'm saying Zionist leaders.
But I think what I was about to say, that this history that you're pointing to leads me to kind of think about is just how deeply anti-Semitic Zionism is and can be.
Yeah.
That there's nothing, not only do I as a Jewish person want to demarcate Zionism from Jewishness, but also to say that I think Zionism often depends very much on anti-Semitism, which is why in the White House right now, in Trump's White House, we see how easily anti-Semitism coexists with Zionism. We have Kushner, who I wouldn't say is anti-Semitic, but many of the other cast of characters in there that are in charge of what's going on in the Middle East, and Trump himself, I think, have absolutely no interest in or respect for Jewish people, if they are not, in fact, anti-Semitic, as someone like Steve Bannon clearly is, who is an architect for a lot of what's happening in
he's
America.
He's a fascist. In fact, I don't know if he's still in Europe, but he was trying to have an international front of right wing. They don't call it fascist necessarily, but extreme right wing organizations, international front, you know, to fight, I don't know who, anybody who's on the left or even liberal for that matter, you know. So, I mean, you can see it happening right now, you know, on multiple levels, not just in the White House, but in other places.
I mean, one thing that I would want to say, while kind of somewhat related to this topic and also taking us somewhere a little bit different, has to do with the question of dialogue. And BDS is often said to shut down dialogue and to be anti-Semitic. Those are the two charge. The liberal charge against it is, well, what's happening in Israel is a problem, but I support dialogue and exchange. And then the other is just to say that this to support Palestinian rights is by definition, and to criticize Israel is by definition anti-Semitic. That is the State Department's definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel. One of the things that I would say in response to this, as a Jewish person who does Palestinian, pro-Palestinian work, is that I'm pretty confident I engage in more dialogue with Palestinians than any of my liberal compatriots who get so passionate about the need for dialogue. I'm pretty sure those people, I've never seen them cite anyone Palestinian. I've never seen them invite anyone Palestinian to a university or to a conference. I'm pretty sure that I have invited more Jewish Israeli as well as Palestinian Israelis to, you know, who are kind of anti-Zionist than they have. And I'm not just saying this is about me, but I'm just saying that this is true for this is true of pretty much everyone I know who does BDS work. And it's true for the Jewish people I know who are engaged in this kind of work, that I just feel like look to that in terms of whether BDS prevents dialogue, whether BDS is anti-Semitic. Because I think that how can you have dialogue with people if you will not admit to the fact that they are occupied and colonized? What is there to discuss? You know, how can you have a conversation if you don't admit those very basic facts? Then you can have a conversation. But if you are denying these conditions of unfreedom, what is there to talk about?
Right, and the interesting thing, these guys don't read, you know, the history. I mean, like, you know, Ilan Pappé, you know, and others, even Avi Schleim, who's a Zionist, but still, like, he was critical, you know, and a lot of other people, they don't read that. And so they remain ignorant, but the worst part is that they don't want to. They don't want to, because then they'll be confused and, you know, things will threaten to become clearer to them so that they might change their position, but they wouldn't, you know. So they are like resisting, you know, discovery of knowledge, let's say.
Well, ignorance is an active state. It's a willful ignoring as opposed to an innocence.
And in this case, ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance leads you to like, I don't know, a big canyon where you go down with it, you see, if you are not in support of international law and international humanitarian law, and just like have a sense of decency. I mean, this is the main thing for individuals, etc. So anybody who doesn't want to, or anyone who doesn't want to, or resists becoming knowledgeable about this shouldn't be talking, you know. I mean, they can say whatever, but you know, they'll be left out of the room if someone else opposing them knows the history and all of that and shows it to them that, hey, you know, what about these things? Can you deny these facts? Or are they fake facts according to Trump?
Well, I mean, I think this is why maps are such dangerous things and are often seen to, and are often banned. Because if you take the maps of disappearing Palestine, and I don't know if maybe you could even pull those up for people as I'm talking, those maps are, you cannot argue with what they are documenting, which is the disappearance of land. Where were things in 1940, you know, 6? Where are they in 1948? Where are they, you know, in 1967? Where are they at the present time? And then if you look at those maps, you also see that this whole kind of discussion of a two-state solution is nonsense. there cannot be a two-state solution at this point in time because there already is one state. And so what you have a choice of is an apartheid state or a democratic state. You don't have a choice of two states anymore when the facts on the ground have put 600,000 settlers into the West Bank. You know, it just makes, are all those people just going to pack up and leave? I don't think so.
No.
So, you know, when you have these facts on the ground, what you have is one state. Make it a democratic state.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of, by the way, I want to clarify something about boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and also about U.S. ACB in particular. Now, a lot of, you know, Zionists who are against BDS and U.S. ACB, they say, you see, well, this is like freedom of speech is being curtailed, and you're not allowing to, what you said, like free flow of information, et cetera, et cetera. But in fact, what U.S. ACB is saying is different from what it is not saying. Or it's saying, you know, that we are not against individual professors from, say, Haifa University, for instance. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because then this is like kept on the side and not talked about by the Zionists who are attacking U.S. ACB or BDS.
It's not only kept on the side, it is actively denied.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm just saying this because it's so frustrating to me. I think we both received, I don't know if you received a letter recently from a faculty member at the University of Hawaii asking that I and many others sign on to a letter condemning BDS because it asks for a kind of a tax on innocent individual academics. And this person knows perfectly well that the academic boycott is aimed at institutions. The South Africa academic boycott was much more stringent. That actually covered individuals too. It was a much blunter instrument. One of the things about the academic boycott of Israel is that it targets institutions, and what that means is that we are free as supporters of the academic boycott to invite Israeli academics to come and speak at our conferences, to pay them honorarium, to have them be our guests, if they come not as a representative of the state of Israel. And so we,
or
as
that
you
university,
know,
which is,
Nadara Shalhoub from Hebrew University, and you know, paid for her to come and give addresses here at church and at the university. And she is an Israeli faculty member. She's a Palestinian faculty member too, which isn't a lot of what this kind of, sometimes it's used to say, you're making this hurt Palestinian academics inside Israel, and then,
that's
you know,
not true.
And that's, I mean, I think that sometimes there are tricky cases, and so I'm not going to pretend this never is without its costs, because boycotts have to hurt in some way. But I also know that whenever there is anything tricky, what we will do on US ACB is write to PACB, the Palestine Academic and Cultural Boycott. And those conversations are extremely thoughtful and nuanced. And also one can go to the PACB website and look at how they make these pretty fine distinctions that govern decision-making in as ethical of ways as possible, in as nuanced of ways as possible, and in ways that penalize individuals as little as possible.
This is an important thing. I also, like a number of Israeli professors, support the academic boycott and cultural boycott of the State of Israel, like Ilan Pape and others, you know. So this is to say, like, it's not a matter of discrimination or what have you. It's just standing up for justice and against discrimination, against racism, and against all of that.
Although we don't know, I mean, the people that tend to be vocal tend not to any longer work in those institutions where it is illegal.
But still they are
to
Israeli
support.
professors.
Yes, they are. And I'm just saying, we don't really know how many Israeli faculty members support BDS, since they are not allowed. It's not.
But they pay the price. So if you're willing to pay the price, you will be vocal. If you are for US ACB but not willing to pay the price, then you wouldn't say anything. Anyway, I'm glad you mentioned something local here regarding how like people are dishonest in terms of trying to combat or struggle against U.S. ACB, for instance. It's like they're they don't do anything honest. They don't say honestly why they are supporting or not supporting ACB, U.S. ACB. So, but there is a local student and faculty for justice in Palestine on the UH campus. So, would you want to say something about that before we run out of time? We still have quite a bit of time, by the way.
That organization has been going in an informal way for a few years now, and I think is really gathering energy, and we are about to become, if we haven't already just become, an official student organization. We had our first event this semester featuring Punahele Kani Kapila, who is a hip-hop artist and student who just returned from a delegation of indigenous people sponsored by the Palestine Youth Movement to visit Palestine. And he came back and reported on his experiences and also shared some music that he wrote in solidarity with the people of Palestine. And I really have enjoyed working with the students here. I think there is an affinity for the Palestinian struggle that people in Hawaii, especially Kanaka Maoli students and faculty, have for Palestine as people that are also living in a site of settler colonialism and under occupation. And so I think that there's a conversation that's been building largely through the efforts of the UH SFJP group to put people in dialogue that are Kanaka Maoli scholar organizers with Palestinian scholar organizers. So we've had visits and roundtable discussions at the Kamakakuakalani Center for Hawaiian Studies each November now for several years running, starting with Noura Erakat, who's coming back again next November, and also with Stephen Salaida, Nadara Shalhoub, Remy Kanazi, and Ramzi Baroud.
Ramzi Baroud, yeah.
So
Ramzi
that's
Baroud.
happened each November, and each November students and faculty have talked with them and forged alliances with them and solidarities with them in relationship to Palestine and Hawaii. And the UH Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine just put out a statement of solidarity for the TMT struggle, saying stop the TMT construction, and did that from the point of an interest in Palestine and Hawaii as sites in solidarity with each other.
Yeah. No, that's very good. I mean, these kinds of matters. But also, like, you were on a TV show locally with J. Fidel, not to be confused with Fidel Castro, by the way. But could you say something about what happened there?
A former student of mine, Will Karan, had invited me to be on the show to talk about my recent trip to Palestine. And he went through all the channels he was supposed to go into.
How recent was your trip?
My most recent trip was last spring, but this was actually a trip before that. That was about a year before that. And so we went to the studio, and Jay Fidel had been unaware of this having been scheduled. It was a fill-in for another show, so it didn't have the usual lead time. And so he was in the studio with a rabbi who was a very strongly Zionist rabbi. And there was, as we went into the recording studio, a lot of shouting. My photos to share from my trip, Time in the West Bank, had mysteriously disappeared and were not available for viewing. There was a very unpleasant and unprecedented, according to the people at Think Tech, announcement at the start of our segment saying what you are about to hear is horrible. Not the exact quote, but it was just saying, Think Tech does not endorse this. This is kind of hateful, and we will have a follow-up segment. They then did an emergency follow-up session. They had someone from the Zionist organization stand with us, call in for that. And they, on that segment, in a way that was quite unethical, attributed things to me that I never said. They said that I called Jews Nazis, which I certainly did not do.
Yeah, because I know you.
And I just said something in this show. They said that I said some other things about mosques. I don't remember exactly what they attributed to me, but it was actually defamation because those were things I did not say. But I thought, well, at least there's the segment saying what, in fact, I did say. But then what happened is they took down that segment, left up their segment. So there was an immediate backlash against that. People protested. They put back up the segment with the kind of warning label in place. And I didn't discover until about a month ago that they had taken that down again. My guess is it had been down for a very long time, but I just was going back and wanted to look at it because a journalist was asking me about gender discrimination on the part of Zionists going after people doing BDS work. And I remembered that segment because they kept calling me Mrs. Franklin and saying things that were really, really disrespectful. And the show wasn't there. Their repudiation of it was still there. And so they had essentially censored the one episode and then left up this one that was really defamation with no check on it. And so a lot of people wrote in protest of this. And they now have both segments. They've taken down both segments now.
And so Fidel Castro, Jeff Fidel.
So unfair.
Yeah,
Fidel Castro.
No, I know, I'm just kidding. So J. Fidel kind of fixed it a little bit? Or?
Well, he, I think, perhaps was worried about legal action since what he did was actually,
it's unethical,
it was
immoral.
Unethical, it was immoral,
illegal.
and possibly, I don't know that you are, it could create a hassle for him to be clearly defaming me. And also the video was captured, the one that I did with Will Cron is captured and it's on the US ACB site. And so I had the
people
clear
can
evidence.
go and see it. Yeah.
It can be seen, and there's evidence there that I did not say the things
right.
that they were saying that I said on this one. So I think taking it down was probably, it wasn't as good as what I hoped, which is that they'd put up the one segment. And
so in a court of law, they will get penalized, I guess.
I don't know, because I think you actually have to prove damages, and I'm not sure that I could. But it's at the very least, slimy behavior.
Yeah, slimy for sure, especially if you go and
desperate.
And see the
and dishonest.
See the video that really what you said there. That's on US ACB now website. So this is really interesting. So despite all these propaganda, Israeli Zionist propaganda campaigns against US ACB and BDS and Palestinians in general, BDS is going forward.
It's going forward,
that's an important thing to say. And they try, these guys, these Zionists, they try to always try to shut you up, by putting, coming down hard on you, and then, but people resist, and people, resist that, and also they fight back in a way that they can, keep going. And so,
Rabab Abdul Hadi, who has been subjected to years and years of Zionist lawsuits, is now suing back.
Yeah, she's doing good.
Doing a counter
so these things don't work, and anyway, we'll go forward. Forward BDS. We ran out of time. Thank you, Cindy, for coming over. Yeah. And thank you very much. Mahalo nui loa, and see you next month. Aloha.